so in this video, we're going to be going through Audio Pro demo file and kind of showing you the ins and outs of all the various demos within this project. So here we are on the homepage, and this is just the simplest implementation of Audio Pro. It shows one audio file, and it's pretty simple, right? You just add Audio Pro to the page. Now, by default, we have one audio track here, and you have to be able to upload that audio file to your server or wherever you want, and get a URL to that file. You then put the URL to that file here, and then you define what type of audio format this is in. The default most of the time is going to be MP3, okay? But there are some other audio formats that you might want to use, and some more modern ones such as WebM, OGG, and Opus as well, that really are kind of bleeding edge. They might not be supported as much on every browser, so you might want to supply some sort of fallback audio format such as MP3 if you plan on using those. Okay. Now, just wanted to say, if you wanted to just supply multiple audios, just go ahead and supply another one. Okay. And actually, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this one here so that we have two. And let's just say, for instance, I was going to have this one was going to be an OGG. Okay. So it's going to be OGG, OGG. Okay. So let's say this is an OGG file. That file doesn't exist right now on my server. I'm only serving up an MP3, but let's pretend it did. I would go ahead and select OGG here. Now, what you would want to do is you want to make sure that the files that you prefer being used be on the top, right? So I'm going to go ahead and drag this one up. So that way my OGG file is first. And if a browser doesn't support that, then it falls back to the MP3. And you can supply multiple here as well. You can add another one and maybe a WAV format or something like that. But basically, the first one that the browser catches that it supports, that is the file that's going to be used. Now let's look at some of the basic settings inside Audio Pro. So up here we have our title. This is basically going to be a title tag for accessibility purposes. So if you have a user that is using a screen reader, this title will then describe what this audio is to them. Okay. For preloading purposes, do you want to do zero preloading on the page? Do you want to load metadata, which basically load like the time so that and also the timeline markers will be loaded on page load? Okay. Or if you do auto, the browser will determine based on the person's connection what to do. Okay. Then you can set the starting volume. I recommend not using 100%, okay? Because sometimes, people will start, playing audio and not realizing maybe their speakers are super loud. So, definitely, probably go a little bit lower than, 100%, right? I think the default here is 80, but you can adjust that to be whatever the start volume you'd like to be. The next are a couple settings for playing inline. Play inline has to do with touch devices. A lot of times, if you were to tap play on an audio player, kind of takes up full screen, just like it does for a video. So this allows it just to remain in line within the browser. Loop audio obviously makes this audio loop. Okay. Then we have some controls here. So you can, jump backwards and forwards by 30 seconds. You can support AirPlay, and you can also turn on speed control. So if you want someone to listen at 1.5x or something like that, you can turn that on. We're going to skip some of these others, and we're going to go down to the bottom here. And if you want to turn on analytics tracking, so if you're using Facebook Pixels or Google Analytics, and you want to have some sort of tracking of whether or not a user plays, if they hit various points within the audio, you can go ahead and turn on these trackers here. Now let's jump onto the playlist demo. So here, if you're using an audio playlist, you're going to list out multiple tracks here. Now, when we're using a playlist, though, it is recommended you just use all one format. You can't mix and say, I want to supply OGG and MP3 versions of every file. Here, you're going to supply one version of a file. And then basically every file here is going to be one track in your playlist. Let's look at some of the playlist specific options here. Basically, when you turn on playlist support, you'll see more options have been added. We have a next track button, a previous track button. So you basically have some more controls, shuffle button as well. You can turn on autoplay next track, which means when one track is done, it'll automatically start playing the next track in the playlist. This is just a little bit of text that shows when a playlist is playing. Let's go ahead and preview that. So we'll see here, I have my playlist here. I set up different tracks. Here we have that now playing text. Okay, so, and it will show the title of that track. And we'll show how to set up that information in a minute. Next is the height list. So this is the actual height of the playlist area above the audio player. And then you can choose a minimum and maximum size of the thumbnails. Okay, so this allows the thumbnail to kind of contrast responsively. So depending on how much space, it'll grow and shrink. We can supply a minimum and maximum value for the size of that thumbnail. Now let's look at the individual track options when we're using a playlist. So some settings I skipped earlier. These settings are only used for when you're using a playlist. So here you can go ahead and select an actual thumbnail that gets displayed. You can either use warehouse or drag and drop. You can supply the actual track information, so the title, as well as a full description of that track. Now, if you are using a playlist, something we haven't gone over is timeline markers, okay? We'll review those in a little bit, but just to let you know, you can actually add timeline markers per track as well. So each track could have its own timeline markers defined. Now, while we're talking about playlists, I just want to quickly review feeds, okay? If you're going to use something like feeds or Total CMS, here's an example of where I'm bringing in the RSS feed from Weaver Radio podcast, the podcast I used to do with Greg Barchard, okay? Here's an example, if you want to peruse this, how I'm taking the RSS feed and I'm actually creating audio tracks for each individual podcast episode. We see here, we now have a track added for every single podcast episode inside the RSS feed for the podcast, which is pretty awesome. The last big feature of Audio Pro is going to be CTAs. So in this example here, let's look at here. We'll see that inside the Audio Pro, I've added a timeline marker. So I'm gone ahead and clicked on add timeline markers. And in this example, I only have one. You can customize the size of that marker as well as the color. Okay. And then further on, since I want to add CTAs as well, you don't have to add CTAs. You can use markers all by themselves, just to kind of delineate key points within the audio. But here we're actually going to use them in combination with each other. Okay. So you go ahead and click on add player CTAs. And here you'll be able to customize the kind of the background color, the color of the close button, and the blur, which is it actually, if you'll notice, let's go ahead and look at this here. Okay. Let's go ahead and play this CTA. I hope you're enjoying Foundation 6. And what you'll notice here is the CTA is overlaid on the content above the audio player. So the background color that you're configuring here is the background that you see here. The close button color, obviously. And if you look, it actually blurs the content that it's laying on top of, right? Which is really cool. Okay. So that allows us to just add a little bit of style of things. Now, the height of the CTA is just dependent on the size of your content within the CTA. So here I added something that was a little bit larger, so it actually needs to fill that. But if I just had something small, maybe audio or a bit of text, you can use CTAs just to portray information. Now, let's go ahead and look at how we can configure those CTAs. So when we add in or when we turn on the CTA feature, you'll notice that another drop-down area displays down here. We can add as many CTAs as you want. Let's have a gander at what we can do here. So when I add a audio CTA, we can actually define where this call to action is going to get launched. Do we want it after the audio ends? After it ends for a specific file, after any marker for a file, add a timestamp, and then add a timestamp for a particular file. Now let's review some of these. So after ends basically is if the audio ends, then trigger this, okay? Now, all the options that are for files, these are kind of like if you're using a playlist, you can have CTAs for specific files within your playlist. And what you can do is you can actually differentiate them based on the name of the file that is currently being played. So this is very powerful because now you can have, if you have a playlist, sometimes you want to have different CTAs based on what audio file is actually playing. So this allows us to do that. And we can do that after a video ends, after a particular marker. Now, when we set we can do on any marker, okay? And then we can also do after a marker at a timestamp, okay? So if you notice up here, I have a timestamp set to 3. If I wanted to trigger a marker for that particular timestamp, I would then say timestamp 3. Now, let's say my particular audio had multiple timestamps or multiple markers. Let's go ahead and show that how you would do that. So here I would, if I want to supply multiple markers, I could just do a comma and let's just say 10. Okay. So now I have markers at 3 seconds and 10 seconds. Basically, I can go ahead and add a new CTA, and I would say after a marker at the timestamp, and then I would set 10. So now I can have different CTAs at 3 seconds and 10 seconds. And as you see, you can add whatever stack content you want, and it will be displayed within the CTA. Now, here you can also turn on and off pausing of the media. Depending on what your CTA is or does, maybe you want to pause the audio. Maybe it just is an informational message that you purely just want to display, but allow the audio to continue going. So you can turn that off with this little checkbox within each individual CTA. Now, if you have our call to action stack, let's just show how we can actually integrate call to action with Audio Pro. So here I've added a call to action, and when you have call to action, you'll notice that there is a new Audio Pro trigger. So inside here, you can actually do when an audio ends, when the audio starts, or when a marker is reached. And you'll notice that for each of these, you have a search URL. This is essentially the same thing as the file options inside of Audio CTA. This allows you to target only a specific file that is being played. So if you want to have external call to actions for different files within a playlist, you can do that here as well. You can target specific timestamps the same way as you would within the built-in call to actions. But then, as you know, with call to action, you can trigger multiple things. So here we're triggering our Peekaboo, but you can trigger Lightboxes, all kinds of third-party stacks as well, foundation stuff. So there's a lot of things that a call to action integrates with that you can easily launch them as a CTA from Audio Pro. You can also do, if you do other analytics based outside of what's supported inside the Audio Pro stack itself, you can integrate with things like Matomo or Go Squared or Clicky or potentially even a custom analytics tracker. And lastly, in the call to action demo within this project file, it's similar to what I kind of reviewed now. Just shows you examples of how you can have multiple external call to actions. One that does it when the video starts, one when the video ends, and another one when a marker is reached within the video. So let's show you an example of that here. So you'll notice here, if I go ahead and start this, we have our call to action when the video starts. We have a call to action when the marker hits, and then we have a call to action when the video ends. So obviously that's a very short video file, but it quickly shows you how you can actually integrate external call to actions with Audio Pro.